Hi guys, today I'm going to be showing you how to make this alicorn, and to make this exact one you're going to need 181 bands total. You can just make a horse, a unicorn, a pegasus, or even a zebra using this design. For the face charm only, if you want to make it like that, you'll need 35 bands, and the wings you'll need 32 bands total. And for the horn, if you want to make the unicorn, it's 4 extra bands. And I'm not even counting the rubber bands for the mane and the tail. We'll also need a pipe cleaner to put inside the neck and body of your zebra or unicorn or horse, so that way the neck can stand up and she should be able to stand upright for you. And also some bands to stuff inside her body. So let's get started. Let's start by making the horn, and you're going to need 4 single bands, whatever color it is. This band I bought from the dollar store a while ago, and it has a little glitter inside. So I'm going to take that single band and looping it 4 times on the hook. If you want to loop it 5 times to make it pointier, you can. Taking another single band, twist double, and we're going to pull all those loops onto the single we doubled and getting it onto a hook like that. Again, single, twist, double for all those bands, and try to not have it twisted. Make sure it's straight. Single, twist, double, pull the bands onto the single we doubled, and I flip it around the front to the other side, and then getting the loops off of my finger and onto my hook. So that's my horn. Taking the color of your unicorn or alicorn that you're making, mine will be white, and getting it onto that single band and put it aside. Let's make the eyes. I'm taking a single black, looping it 4 times on my hook, and I'm using navy blue around it, looping it twice on one side and twice on the other. Repeat for the other eye, looping a single band 4 times on the hook, then looping your second color twice on one side and then twice on the other. And if it's too hard for you, you can just use only a single band for the eye color. You don't have to do 2. And putting it onto a single band, pulling all those loops very carefully onto a single band that's the color of our face. So there's our eye, and let's just leave it on the hook so it doesn't come apart. Let's make the face, and I'm going to add some mane for our horse or unicorn or alicorn or whatever you're making, or zebra, and putting it on the first center peg like that. And I'm using about 14 bands. You can use as many or as little as you want. And if you're making a zebra, just use black and white. Taking 2 single bands, and we'll cover the first to the second peg on the center of our loom. And then we'll pull all the mane onto the 2 single band that we just looped from the first to the second peg in the center. Taking 2 more single bands and looping it from the center to the right first peg, and repeat for the other side with 2 single bands. If you're making a zebra, just make sure you use 1 black and 1 white, or 2 blacks, and just alternate between black and white as you go along, and it'll create the zebra look that you want. And now with 2 single bands, we'll come down once on both sides of our face like that, and getting another set of mane for your horse or alicorn or zebra. Just remember to use the right colors that you want, and set it on the 3rd peg on the center of our loom, taking 2 single bands and looping it from the second to the third peg, and then we'll move all those main bands onto the 2 bands that we just looped on. Taking 2 single bands, we'll come in diagonally from the second to the third center peg for both sides. Let's cap the third center peg by looping it 4 times with a single band. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4. Add our eyes, going to take it off of a hook and loop it on the second peg to the second peg on our loom. Split our eyes out and pulling the center loop over the second peg in the center of our loom, like that. So our eyes are on, and that's what yours should look like. And let's do our ear real quick. It's really easy. We're taking a single band, looping it 4 times on the hook. We'll do the other ear, taking a single band, looping it 4 times on the hook, taking 2 single bands and pulling all the 4 loops onto the 2 single bands. Center it and attaching it to the first peg for both sides. The other ear, same thing, taking 2 single bands, getting the 4 loops onto our 2 single bands, and then looping it on the other side, the first side peg. So our ears are on. Now we're going to go under the cap band, grabbing the top 2 single and loop up and onto the right. Mine went to the right. You want to see the nice teardrop. Go back in, grab the next top 2 bands, and it's going to the left for me. And the last 2 bands on the third center peg, loop up and onto the center. So that's what yours should look like, and push everything down. We're about to add the front of our face. That's what it should look like, and we can just pull these loops off of the center third peg completely. So we have room to work with for our front of our face, the muzzle area. Taking 3 single bands, we're coming from the second to the third peg in the center of our loom. And remember, if you're making a zebra, make sure you're using black and white bands. And taking 2 single bands, coming from the third to the fourth peg in the center. Taking 2 single bands, we'll come down the sides, the second to the third peg for both sides. Taking a single band, twist double, we'll loop it from the third to the fourth center peg for both sides. Single, twist double. Push it down. Taking another single, and we'll cap off the fourth center peg 3 times. So that's 1, 2, 3. If you're doing a zebra, you might use a black band to cap that off, and remember to alternate between black and white so it looks like a zebra. Taking a single band, we're going to put a holding band across the third peg to the third peg, and we're looping it 3 times if you can. So stretch it out, twist it over, looping it twice, pull it out again, twist it over, and looping it for the 3rd time. So it's very tight. Now taking a single band, twist double, and we'll loop it across the second peg to the second peg on our loom. And this gives us the tapered look we want for our horse. And if you're just making the horse, then this is it. We're going to start to loop up, but I'm going to add my horn for my unicorn or alicorn, and I'm looping it from the first peg to the first peg on my loom. And center it. So that's what yours should look like. Now we're going to go under the cap band, the fourth center peg, grabbing the top two loops and pulling it up and onto itself, creating the nice teardrop. Reach back in, grabbing the next top two loops and pulling it to the left. If yours goes to the center, take it to the center. Go back under, grabbing the last two loops and pulling it up and onto the center. Now let's do the sides. Once again, we're going to reach under everything, grabbing the bottom two bands and loop up and onto itself, creating the teardrop. Other side, same thing, reaching in, grabbing the bottom two bands and very carefully loop up and onto itself, creating the nice teardrop. Loop up the side and the second side peg, grabbing the bottom two bands, loop up and onto the ear peg, the first side peg. Repeat for the other side and very carefully loop up and onto the first side peg. Before we loop up to the first center peg, we're going to add the front main, so get as many bands as you want, whatever color you want, and remember your zebra to use black and white. And we're going to hold that and loop it all on the first center peg. Like that, I'm holding it down so it doesn't come off. Now I'm going to go on the side first peg, grabbing the bottom two bands and loop up and onto the center first peg, and that should hold your main down. Let's do the other side. Go under, grabbing the bottom two bands and loop up very carefully and onto the center first peg. So that's what your horse's face or alicorn zebra should look like. Now go in the third center peg, grabbing the three bands and loop up and onto the center second peg. Now in the center second peg, we're going to reach all the way under, and we can't see through this mess, and you just want to grab the bottom two bands that's buried in that peg and pull it up. And then if you have a horn, split your horn out and loop it around the first center peg. So that's what your horse or alicorn or zebra's face should look like. Now taking the color of your horse's mane, we're going to put a hook through that center first peg all the way through to the bottom, grabbing the bands to tie off our horse's mane. Pull it through, keep it on a hook, and then we're going to pull all the top mane up, creating that hole and putting a hook through the bottom to grab the other side of our band to tie the slip knot. Pull it through and tying our slip knot. And let's take a horse's or zebra or whatever you're making off the loom. So that's what it should look like. Tighten up your slip knot band so it doesn't come loose. Pull out your horn if you have a horn. Push out your eyes and fix it to the way that you want her to look. And fix your mane, pull it out so it's not out the front of our face or in our eye or anything. It should all be in the back of our head. So there's our horse's, unicorn, or zebra's face so far, and if you just want the face charm, you're done. But let's continue on to make the rest of the body, and remember to always alternate color if you're making a zebra. Let's make our legs, and I already made my set for my alicorn. I'll show you how to make the front and hind legs, and you can use whatever color and pattern you want. So I'll make it as if I'm making a zebra. To make the hind legs, we're taking 2 single band for the hooves, looping it 3 times on a hook, taking 2 single bands, whatever color you want, twist double, and we're pulling all those loops off of our hook and onto the 2 single bands that we doubled. And make sure it's centered, taking 2 single bands, twist, double it, and pulling all those loops onto the 2 single we doubled and getting it onto our hook. And once again, don't be afraid to use any color you want for your zebra if that's what you're making, just pulling those bands onto your hook. Our last 2 set of bands, we're going to twist double it and pulling the loops off of our hook and onto the 2 single we doubled. So that's what yours should look like, and we want to make sure it's straight so our horse, zebra, whatever you're making stands up straight. So we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 2 single bands that we doubled. Right now, for the top part of our leg, taking 3 single bands and pulling all those loops onto the 3 single bands, twist it around, putting the loop onto our hook. Taking 4 single bands for our hind legs, getting it onto our hook, and pulling all those loops onto our hook. So there's our hind leg, and now put it all onto a single band to attach to our body, and we'll tie a loose slip knot just to put it aside. Let's make the front leg, same thing almost. Taking 2 single bands for the hooves, looping it 3 times, taking 2 single bands, twist double, and pulling all those loops onto the 2 single we doubled, and getting it centered, 2 more single bands, twist double, pulling all the loops and getting it onto a hook. 2 more single bands, twist double. So we're doing that 4 times. That's our third one. Make sure it's centered. And making sure it's straight so our horse will stand up. Taking 3 single bands for our front legs and pulling the loops onto the 3 single bands, twist it around and getting the loop onto our hook and center it. Finally, 3 more single bands for our front legs and getting the loops onto the 3 single bands and onto a single band to attach to a body later. So that's what your front leg should look like, and tie a loose slip knot. So go ahead and pause the video to make your set of legs in whatever color and pattern you want, and come back when you're done. let's make our wings, and you can make it whatever color you want. So you're going to need 16 bands for each wing. Taking a single band, that's your horse color, and looping it from the first to the second peg on our loom. And I'm just using orange so you can see. Taking a single orange, twist, double it, coming from the second to the third peg in the center. Another single band coming from the third to the fourth peg in the center. Working with single bands, will come diagonally from the center third to the side fourth for both sides. And once again, make it whatever color you want. I'm just using orange so you can see. Now coming down this right side, this third to the fourth peg, and repeat for the other side. Coming down the center fourth to fifth peg, like that, and coming down the left side from the fourth to the fifth peg, and we'll loop a single band from the right fourth to the center fifth peg. Push it down. On the left side, we'll come down one more with a single band from the fifth to the sixth, and we'll come down the center from the fifth to the sixth peg, like that. And then we'll loop a single band from the sixth center to the sixth side peg on the left. Taking a single band, we'll loop on the left from the sixth to the seventh peg. Now cap the end peg off with a single band, looping it 4 times. So that's 2, 3, 4. Taking a single, twist, double, and putting a holding band across like that from this fifth peg to the center sixth peg. Taking another single, twist, double, and we'll create the triangle right there on the fourth peg on each row. Now go under the cap band, grabbing the bottom single, loop up and onto itself, creating the nice teardrop. Go in the next peg, grabbing the top single, and it should go to the center, loop it there. Go back in on the left side, grabbing the bottom single, loop up and onto itself. Let's continue up the left side, always grabbing the bottom single and looping it up and onto itself. And we'll stop to the third center peg. So my left side is done. Now let's work in the center sixth peg, going in, grabbing the bottom single and loop up and onto itself. Now the fifth peg, we're reaching in, grabbing the top single, and it should go to the right, like that, and continue up our right side, looping the bottom single up and onto itself, creating the nice teardrop, and continue the right side to the center third peg. Let's continue with the center fifth peg, grabbing the bottom single and loop up and onto itself, and continue up to the third center peg, and all your bands are now looped and connected to the center third peg, reaching in the center third peg, grabbing the bottom 2 single and loop up and onto itself, and finishing off onto the first center peg. And let's take our wing off the loom. And if you're done, go ahead and pause the video to make your second wing. And come back when you're done. So there are my wings. Let's make our tail, and we're going to take the bands for our tail and looping it on the side first peg or wherever you're doing it. Taking a single band, the color of your horse or alicorn or whatever you're making it, looping it from the first to the second peg, taking your next set of bands for your tail and looping it on the third peg, taking your tail color and looping it on the second to third peg, and let's pull all those bands onto that single band. And the last set, same thing, taking your pile of bands for your tail, looping it on the next peg down, getting your single band for your tail and looping it from the third to the fourth, and piling all your tail bands onto that single band. Hold it down, and we're going to loop the bottom band up and over to the third peg, so that now holds all those bands for our horse's tail. Reaching in, grabbing the bottom single and loop up and onto the second peg, and now pull all this horsetail bands onto the first single band, getting it onto that single band, and pull the bottom single up and over and onto the first side peg, and take it off the loom. So there's our tail, and let's tie it off in a loose slip knot for the time being, and let's put it aside to add to our body later. Now with our horse, zebra, or alicorn or unicorn's head, we're going to turn it around. Underneath, we're going to grab these back 4 loops, getting it onto a hook. It's near the mane, and you can see the cap band in between the front two. So those are the 4 loops you need to grab. Get it onto your hook, getting 4 single bands, and we're going to pull all those loops and getting it onto our 4 single bands. And on a hook, we're going to attach it on the right first peg, pull a horse's head back, and attaching the other side to the center second peg. So that's what yours should look like. Grabbing 2 single bands off of the right first peg and looping it to the center first peg. Now go to the center second peg, grabbing the top 2 loops and looping it onto the right second peg. And that's what yours should look like. We've covered only 4 pegs. Now we're going to add more mane for our creation, grabbing as many bands as you want in whatever color combination, and we're going to put it on the second right peg on a loom, like that. Just loop it on there, taking a single band, the color of your horse or alicorn or whatever you're making, and looping it from the second center to the right second peg, and then pulling all the mane onto that single band. Taking a single band and covering the 4 pegs. So that's what yours should look like. Now we're looping the bottom 2 bands up and over to the center, and you should have 2 loops left per peg. Push it down. That was row number 2. Row 3, we're going to do the same thing, getting our mane bands, as many as you want, whatever color combination. Once again, just right now holding it on the second right peg, grabbing a single band, looping it from the second right to the center second peg, and pulling all your mane onto that band. Now taking 3 more single bands, covering the rest of our 4 pegs, and then looping the bottom 2 bands up and over to the center, leaving 2 loops left per peg. Remember, if you're making a zebra, to use either black or white anywhere to give it that zebra look and pattern that you want. So that's what yours should look like, and that was row number 3. And now let's expand. We're going to pull these 2 loops off the second center peg, and we're going to loop it on the left second peg. We're going to take a single band off of the first center peg that's attached to the right first peg and looping it to the left first peg. So taking a single loop off, check to make sure it's attached to the first, and this one isn't, so I'm going to hold it, grabbing the other loop off of the center first, and it should be attached to the right first, and I moved it to the left first. Now reattaching the one we're holding onto the first center peg. And now for the second right peg, we're going to grab the top single that's attached to the first and moving it to the third center peg. So going in, grabbing the top single, and I see it's attached to the first, so I'll move it to the third. So now we've covered 6 pegs, and that's what yours should look like. These 2 has a single loop on it, and these 2 has 2 loops on them. Taking 6 single bands, we're covering the 6 pegs, and we'll loop the bottom bands up and over, leaving 2 loops left per peg. So go under, this peg has a single loop, pull it up and over, leaving 2 loops left, and just go around your loom, grabbing the bottom bands up and over, leaving 2 loops left per peg. Push it down. And that was row number 4. We're going to now expand, taking these 2 loops off of the center third peg and looping it onto the center fourth peg. Now moving a single loop off of the second side peg that's attached to the first and moving it to the third. So grabbing the top loop off of the second side peg, check to make sure it's attached to the first, which this is, and moving it to the third. So now the second and third peg each has a loop. Repeat for the right side, grabbing the top loop, and mine is attached to the center fourth, and I don't want that one, so I'm putting it aside, grabbing the other loop off of the second side peg, and that's attached to the first, moving it to the third, and then reattaching this one that we took off first onto the second side peg. So now the second and third each has a loop. So now that we've expanded, we're covering 8 pegs, and for row number 5 we're adding our front legs. Get our legs, undo our loose slip knot, and check to make sure there are only 6 loops on that single band that we undid, and attaching it to the first left peg to the second left peg on our loom. Getting our other foot, once again make sure there are only 6 loops on that single band, and we'll attach it from this right first to the center first peg. Let's add our wings. We're going to make sure the back of our wing is facing down, and we'll attach it on the third left peg to the center fourth peg on our loom. Taking our second wing, and we want to make sure the back of our wing is pointing down, and we'll attach it on the second to third peg on the right of our loom. If you're not making an Alicorn or Pegasus, then go ahead and just loop a single band on those 2 pegs. Now taking a single band to cover the rest of our 8 pegs, and we'll loop the bottom bands up and over So the first left peg has 2 loops, pull it up and over to the center, and the second and third should have a single loop to pull up and over to the center. And remember, you should have 2 loops left per peg. Push everything down, and that was row number 5. Rows 6, 7, and 8, we're going to take a single band covering our 8 pegs and looping the bottom 2 bands up and over, leaving 2 loops left per peg. And this process is pretty repetitive. I'm just going around my loom, grabbing the bottom 2 bands and pulling it up and over and making sure that I have 2 loops left on each peg. So I'm going to fast forward through rows 6, 7, and 8 and come back when I'm done. That was row number 8. Row number 9, we'll add our front legs, getting our loose slip knot off and getting our hind legs. There should be 8 loops on that single band, and we'll put it on the first to second peg on the left, and the other leg, same thing, we're looping it onto the first right to the center first peg. And for the rest of our pegs, we're looping a single band to cover the rest of our 8 pegs, and then looping the bottom 2 bands up and over, leaving 2 loops left per peg. Remember, if you're making the zebra, to alternate your bands between black and white. So that's row number 9. Push everything down. And now let's add our tail. We're going to get the loose slip knot onto our hook, getting the loops onto a hook like that. And we're going to get it onto these 2 loops off of the third right peg. So pulling those 2 loops off of the third right peg and slipping our tail onto those 2 loops. And let's take our bands off of the loom, going around. I'm going counterclockwise, whatever you're comfortable with, getting the 2 loops off of each of the 8 pegs. Onto a hook. So that's what your alicorn should look like at this point. If you made an alicorn, if you made a horse or zebra or unicorn or Pegasus, it should look similar to this one. And let's pull the mane so it's out on top, especially the ones on the back of the neck, and it's not sticking inside. Now with our pipe cleaner and our extra hook, if you have one. If you don't have one, transfer these onto like a toothpick or anything that you have, and then get your hook, putting a hook through the center of our head and through our neck area, inside our neck and down the body. and out through the bottom like that, and getting our pipe cleaner onto a hook. And let's pull it through our body. And this will help shape our creation so the neck and head and everything stands straight. And be careful not to break your bands. So I pulled it up through my head, and I'm going to take it off my hook like that. Now let's cut it off. And we're going to stuff our creation. I'm taking some old bands that I have, and you can use whatever you have around. Careful not to cut your finger and push all those bands inside the body. And don't overstuff it. And now let's tie it off in a slip knot, taking a single band, getting on a hook and pulling all those loops off of our hook and onto our single band, and then cinching it off. And if you want, you can loop it once around the tail on the top side, and then let's tuck it inside the body to hide our slip knot band. So there's my alicorn, and fix the body so it looks right. If it's overstuffed, then take out some bands so that way he's not too fat or she's not too fat. Position your neck and your face and your wings, and fix your mane. Can kind of pull it to the side, and fix your legs so she'll stand for you. Remember, you can position your neck to the way you want her head to go. So this is your alicorn. I hope you like her. Thanks for watching.